Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, for the testimony. I'll now recognize panelists here for 5 minutes, and I would like to start with our chairman, Mr. Westerman.
Thank you, Mr. Lamalfa. Again, thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Reynolds, I just want to get a clear answer for the committee and for the American people. Do you have any plans or discussions ongoing regarding housing migrants at additional sites located in the national park system?
There is no other requests for use of sites beyond the Floyd Bennett Field that you've mentioned, or any plans that I can offer or speculate on.
Can you assure concerned Americans that their national parks will not be used to house any additional migrants?
I can assure you that we will review everything for a legal basis, and a conservation protection is job one.
So on August 21st, the Daily News reported that New York Governor Hochul stated that, quote, she had been in negotiations with the White House for months, end quote, over the lease at Floyd Bennett Field, and that, quote, the federal government had previously taken the position that shelters cannot be built on Interior Department property, end quote. For the record, can you please provide the committee the names of the employees at the White House, Office of the President, Department of the Interior, and the National Park Service that participated in these months-long negotiations, as well as an explanation for what made them change their mind about the policy?
At my level of the organization, what I can tell you is that we knew that the state of New York approached the administration. After they had done so, the Department of Homeland Security had visited Floyd Bennett Field, I think last spring, and again maybe in late summer. And when you have such a complex set of decisions, as well as how fast the humanitarian crisis seemed to be, there have been so many folks in the middle of this, Mr. Westerman. I'm not sure there is one person, but I know that the state of New York approached the administration. We were asked to get the job done.
Was there some kind of an emergency declared so that NEPA could be waived?
No, my understanding is no emergency was declared, but there was a humanitarian crisis of some urgency.
So could this be a pattern in other Park Service lands where there's no emergency, but NEPA and ESA and other environmental protections could be waived?
Well, I can't speculate on what might come. I would imagine that there's very few circumstances that are as unique as the Floyd Bennett Field situation, being in downtown New York.
So is that, in your opinion, does that follow all laws and regulations to waive NEPA without an emergency declaration?
I can say that we actually didn't waive NEPA. It was done under a special provision called alternative arrangements, and it is in the CFR. It's unusual. I would be happy to also detail that out more. We've got attorneys that would explain and walk through the CFR steps that were used.
So how long did it take to do that process?
I can't recall exactly, but it was very quick. I would say a matter of weeks.
When we were at Floyd Bennett Field, we were told within a week it was pushed through. That was record time, as you're probably aware, for any kind of environmental analysis to take place, which makes it sound like somebody very high in the administration said, get this done. What changed the Park Service's mind? And according to Governor Hochul, initially the Park Service or Interior Department said, we don't do things like this, but all of a sudden there was a change of mind.
I'm not privy to those negotiations, but I can tell you that I can assure you, sir, and the American people, that there's a basis in law for how this went about, and we have posted all of those things up on the nps.gov website. If you go there and look, there's the director's decision memos and also the environmental analysis.
So this could be a precedent if somebody wants to do something, say, in my hometown of Hot Springs National Park. We could just go through a less than a week process to waive all regulations and make that happen.
I think that the health and safety humanitarian crisis is what drove this. If those conditions were to exist, I think there'd obviously be reviews. But again, I think this is a very unique situation that happened there.
Mr. French, at which sites are the Forest Service observing the most foot traffic by illegal migrants through the National Forest System?
Generally, the most foot traffic we have is through the Coronado National Forest and the Cleveland National Forest.
What environmental impacts are being observed as a result of illegal immigration through Forest Service lands?
There is some natural resource degradation, but primarily it's dumping trash.
I've seen a lot of that myself down there, and it's amazing. I think the statistics were 8 or 9 pounds of trash per migrant. So, multiply that times a couple of million, that's a lot of trash to be picked up. I'm out of time. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Westerman. I'll go ahead and recognize our ranking member, Mr. Grijalva, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was remiss in not thanking our witnesses. I appreciate you being here. And also, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to extend our collective condolences to Ranking Member Stansberry, whose mom, Bunny, died and passed away, and extend to her our condolences and our heartfelt sympathy.
Thank you for telling us.
Mr. Reynolds, let me ask you a question. Oregon Pipe, how much, what percentage of the border in Oregon Pipe has a wall on it?
I would say at this point, let me put it to you this way without percentage. All of its boundary now, except for about a half a mile stretch.
Okay, but from what we hear in terms of what we know and what we continue to hear, is the number of border crossers are increasing. It's unprecedented. It continues to increase. Why hasn't this border wall prevented migrants from entering the country? Why has it been the deterrent that everybody talked about when it was being discussed?
Well, sir, I will say that we have seen still a continuation of crossings. Not to deflect from you, but we're not the border or immigration policy or operators the way CBP is. But I can tell you that what we are doing is we have a great cooperative relationship with Homeland Security, with Mr. French and his colleagues in the Forest Service, and we try and mitigate and help manage with them the crossings as they occur. We've seen an uptick in certain human trafficking things, but we've also seen concentration of crossings at different areas where the road network is, things like that.
And, I think one of, it's more of a comment, and thank you, Mr. Reynolds. One of the centerpieces that my Republican colleagues have promoted as a solution is H.R. 2's Secure the Borders Act. And effectively is to turbocharge the waiver of laws in terms of the construction of the wall, including NEPA, which is, it's kind of like a love-hate thing with NEPA here on this committee among the Republicans. When it's convenient to use it as an issue, NEPA's wonderful. When it's in the way of a mine or an extraction or a drill, then it's absolutely awful, and we got to get rid of it. And I mentioned that, and I mentioned that it's going to, the partnerships that we have in communities, I think there's a potential with H.R. 2 of the burden, and the financial burden falling on local communities and in all across the Southwest, because what this does is effectively cuts programs, and it cuts the funding and the resources for those programs. It eliminates it ends asylum as a concept and as a legal responsibility in this country and internationally, and it doesn't deal with the root cause. It doesn't deal with the crisis that we're seeing globally. It doesn't deal with the demographic change of those folks coming up here in families seeking asylum. It's not the people running from Border Patrol and trying to hide to get here. It is people that are turning themselves in. And it is a different phenomena. And from talking to Border Patrol agents and the chief in the Tucson sector, it is a phenomena that is not, that is unprecedented. And so as these demands increase, and the only alternative out there being promoted by the Republican majority is H.R. 2, which shifts the burden to local communities, ends all the partnerships, cuts funding to those areas, and mandates an end to asylum and refugee laws as we've known them, and we've known them historically. So I think that the debate is important, but I think central to that are the things that respond to the needs in the border. And I said it earlier, providing the resources with the supplemental that continues to deal and manage the humanitarian crisis. 2, to deal with security and refocus and re-energize and resource that effort to break what is syndicates and organized crime, and to properly staff our park service so that they are able to provide not only the coordination with Homeland Security that Mr. Reynolds mentioned, but also for the safety and security of our visitors, and that visitorship has ticked up across the country. Those are discussion points that I think there is common and middle ground on. But to say that H.R. 2 is the panacea and fundamentally will not solve the issue, neither will a wall, I think we're missing the target. The target is not only the security of the border, but managing what is an unprecedented humanitarian crisis before us. And with that, I yield back because I have no more questions.
Thank you, Ranking Member Grijalva. No, we'll turn now to Mr. Rosendale from Montana for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I will tell you that walls do work. We see them around yards, we see them around communities, and we see them around countries, and walls do work. When you have incomplete wall, when you have construction that has not been concluded, then you certainly have gaps and areas where folks can go around those walls, and therein is where we have our problem. Mr. Reynolds, what measures is the National Park Service taking to combat illegal marijuana cultivation within the national parks, and what successes have been achieved so far?
Yes, hello, Mr. Rosendale. This is a pretty active cooperative venture that we do, again, with our colleagues in the Forest Service, in particular in Western parks, as well as state and local sheriff, folks like that. We are continuously finding, mapping, doing intel, finding these places. I can tell you from experience I had in Yosemite, we would helicopter these things out if we could. We deal with poisons that are left behind. So they are, and others have mentioned there are cartels, so there's danger to the hiking public and things like that. So we're very, very serious about it. We don't do it alone, and we ask all of our partners, state and local, federal, to.
So do you have any kind of numbers as far as the amount of area that you've been able to remove these cultivated plants from, or the number of plants or anything like that, and how that trajectory has looked over the last 5 years or so?
I know we'll have those numbers, and I will get those to you very quickly, but I don't have them handy in front of me, Mr. Rosendale.
Very good, very good. Can you provide statistics on the number of illegal marijuana grows discovered within the national parks since the start of the Biden administration in 21? If you don't have those, if you can include that with the balance of information.
We will do that. I'm sorry I wasn't prepared for that, but we'll get it to you right away.
It's okay. Thank you. Could you describe the coordination process between the National Park Service and the Department of Homeland Security with regard to the border crossings in national parks situated near the U.S.-Canada border, such as Glacier National Park?
Yeah, we definitely work with the Border Patrol folks just as we do on the southern border. We're not aware, nor are there reports when we looked into this week about problems at Glacier, but there's a vigilance to it and a cooperative venture just like the southern border. It's much like Mr. French described, there's the different stationing of our law enforcement folks along with CBT. We let them do the immigration work, right? And we follow up on resource damage or humanitarian help and aid as they ask.
Have you seen any type of an increase over the last 3 years since the Biden administration has taken over?
Not in the northern boundary. We haven't seen much of an increase at all.
That natural barrier called climate seems to be helping us a lot up there on the northern border. One thing that I'm really concerned with, we had a hearing in here 2 weeks ago about the Floyd Bennett Field, the national park up there in New York, and it was very telling to me to have city council members who were sitting here bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats, talking about the problems that building that facility would pose on their community, not only from a safety aspect, but from a lack of infrastructure aspect, and then from what it was going to do to their local economy of having this population of young males there with not a lot to do and to be able to just wander around. What bothered me is, in addition to that, was the fact that we were going to be taking one of our national parks, something that, quite frankly, all taxpayers have an investment in. We invest in those properties by keeping the infrastructure up. It's an investment in the country because it doesn't have a tax base, so we are literally subsidizing those areas. And then to have people located there for extended periods of time, a year, 2 year, we don't really have a deadline, a proposed deadline on their occupation, if you will, when an American citizen is only allowed to stay there for 14 days at a time. Do you have any kind of opinion about the impact of long-term relocation of illegal immigrants on the national park system?
Not an immigration expert at all. We leave that to the Department of Homeland Security as well as, in this case,
let's leave the
city.
The immigration end of it out,
Yep.
okay? A
So-
long-term occupation of a population of
Understood.
individuals
Yeah.
in the national park.
In this case, which is listed publicly, we've got a lease for this situation. In other words, the property, a section of this 1,300 acres is what makes Floyd Bennett Field, about 20 acres, have been leased to the city. The lease requires them to improve and benefit the park through various projects. So it totals somewhere between 12 to 14 million for those projects. So in this case, there is a very, very carefully thought through plan on the runways where the camp is and trying to maintain and keep open everything that Floyd Bennett Field has. We, keep an eye on us.
So
We'll
what
keep-
is
we'll
the
keep
so
watching
what
it.
is the okay? That's all the data about what's actually going to happen, and we know what is going to happen. What I'm trying to determine is what is the impact on that facility as opposed to the people that had been going there before. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I see that I did go over
Yeah.
my
We'll
time.
let the witness
I'll yield
answer.
back.
Yep. We, short answer, Congressman Rosendale, is it's a very defined area on a tarmac, on a runway, a historic runway, and we tried to avoid all the heavy use areas of Floyd Bennett Field.
I'll have follow-ups for you, just in case. Mr. Lamalfa from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Gosar. Appreciate it, and to our witnesses for being here. So there's a lot of facets to this issue here. I mean, we have so far this year approximately 2.8 million, they call them encounters, of illegal immigration at our border, and only about 230,000 this year have been deported, is the stats that I have. So we can see that when we're using our national parks, I suppose, as a temporary landing zone for folks like this, maybe that would be a discussion if the border was controlled and you'd have a finite number of people already in country, but it's ever expanding. We reach a new milestone every month of people coming into this country, and it looks unstoppable presently. And so as we also see it come in another direction with more expansions of wilderness areas and monument areas, there's going to be less and less parkland available to people to enjoy the great outdoors if it's coming from both ends with, illegal immigration on those lands and then less access to the other lands. So indeed, it makes me wonder how temporary are these thoughts of housing people in these places, and what term would that look like? Then what do you do at the end of that term? But what I want to drill down to is something that Chairman Westerman touched on as well in my Northern California district. In Siskiyou County, for example, which is about 700 miles from the Mexican border, the illegal marijuana grows are just vast. Many, many hundreds of greenhouses are there. And the efforts of Sheriff LaRue up there and so many allies there have been valiant, but it's overwhelming when we need more help from the federal government to help take care of their lands, as well as be a part of where it's happening on the private lands on those areas. It's overwhelming to have these cartels. California, of course, being a border state, it's not going to slow down very much. Interstate 5 is a pipeline for so many things, including that. So the Forest Service owns about 45% of the federal land in the area, BLM 33%, National Park Service has about 16%. So the explosion of these marijuana grows with our cartels, the chemicals, illegal chemicals that farmers can't even use in this country, not even produced here, are polluting the soil and the groundwater. And there's workers there are being effectively employed, so to speak, as indentured servants. People trafficking, the whole works. So the caches of illegal weapons that have been found and how they are a threat to local residents just trying to live a good life and do their farming and ranching, threaten those residents, threaten our sheriff's officers and other police officers. It's not a good situation, and not even that far from the border. So me and my team have been following, trying to help our locals, Sheriff LaRue and our district attorney and others, but the invasion is so huge. We need much more help from the federal government to curb this destruction of our public lands and our way of life up there. So how are your agencies in partnership with BLM working to support our local law enforcement who have become the de facto frontline responders to drug smuggling, human trafficking, and other international criminal activity? Let me throw it to you, Mr. Reynolds, first.
Yeah, again, as I mentioned earlier, let me just say, Mr. LaMalva, we appreciate those comments. We want to keep working with you and your team on these issues. We're aware of some of the closure issues that have also perhaps come up with these fires. So a big part of what we do is work with other agencies that have better intel. A lot of times our local sheriff department cooperate, our local law enforcement are really big partners in this. And again, especially in the parks that you mentioned, it's Forest Service usually around us, almost always, sometimes BLM up in that part of the world. And we work as closely as we can so that both uniforms, if you will, are out on site whenever they find these places and start to remove them, document them.
Getting to maybe more the core of the issue, is there any lack of federal authority that you need for you to work with Homeland Security, the FBI, or other local and state agencies to do more, to go farther, to be able to enforce? Because these grows are not hidden. They're right out in front of everybody. The greenhouses dot the landscape. And whether it's in Siskiyou County or other surrounding counties, whether they're illegally on federal land or somehow have the cover of legality with who owns the land, which they're blowing through county ordinances. What more could we be doing? What other authorities do you need?
I think the authorities are there. I can let Mr. French comment on any gaps that we may have. It just may be a staffing and a continuing prioritizing that we need to focus on.
Please, Mr. French, I'm a little out of time already. It flies by here, but go ahead.
No worries. Thank you. I think it fundamentally comes down to a staffing issue. We work incredibly closely with our other federal partners, states, counties. It's a manpower issue. In the last 5 years, we remediated more than 330 grow sites, took out 370 miles of pipe. It's a big issue.
Well, we're talking thousands of grow sites, right in people's face. So if you're talking staffing, we need to partner with more agencies that already have staff. So, and we'll work with you some more. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. The gentleman from Arizona's got a request.
Thank you. Just a unanimous consent request to enter into the record 2 articles that detail why the wall doesn't work, and part by demonstrating that it's been breached so often that there's full-time welding crews down to do the repairs. The other one is yes, unanimous consent to enter into the record Border Patrol's own data that shows that fiscal year 2023, 90% of the almost 26,000 pounds of fentanyl seized along the Mexican border have been at the ports of entry. Yield back.
I didn't know I got you so riled up there to get all that in there. But so
Facts are
without
fact.
objection, so ordered. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Subcommittee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Gosar, for the opportunity, and members of the subcommittee for allowing me to wave on and join you here today. I appreciate that. And thank you to our witnesses for your time and testimony. It's been brought to my attention, Mr. French, that you attended ASU. So, Representative Grijalva and I won't hold that against you in this hearing, being from Tucson and a U of A grad.
Fair enough.
Speak for yourself.
Okay, never mind. He talked me into it, so we'll probably give you a little bit of a hard time, but thank you, sir, for being here. I do want to give you a special thanks, Mr. French, for your service here in the Arizona's Coronado National Forest. Thank you for that. I represent Arizona's 6th Congressional District. Representative Grijalva and I share the city of Tucson, which in my district sits along the southwest border and contains a significant amount of federal land. Around 39% of the state's land is federally owned and operated. Of approximately 2,000 miles of the border, almost 40% is on federal lands. I hear constantly from my constituents back home about the impact of the Biden administration's failed border policies, and I'm very concerned about the impact that it's having on our local environment as well. I'll start with Mr. Reynolds here. Which sites are the National Park Service observing the most foot traffic by the illegal crossings through the national park system?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. So of the 380-ish mile of boundary that I'm aware the parks touch over time or over space, Oregon Pipe near you in Tucson and Coronado are our big foot traffic area, but Oregon Pipe probably has the highest.
And how's the National Park Service working with law enforcement to shut down these pathways and mitigate the damage being done on the National Park System lands?
We watch carefully with particularly our Border Patrol colleagues in those parks that we just mentioned. A little bit of Forest Service and BLM is down in there as well. And we just have try as best we can to have a seamless approach. If there's concerns at all that you've heard, we'll be happy to follow up on it.
Yeah, I would love that. Can you also touch a little bit on the costs associated with remediating National Park Service lands along the southern border that have been utilized by these crossings as they enter our nation?
We carefully document the costs. There are special project monies for this, and I'll be happy to follow up tomorrow with you on the budget numbers.
We'd like to get that information as well, so thank you. Mr. French, how many pounds of trash would you say have been picked up in the National Forest System lands located along the southern border this year?
Along the southern border, I'm not entirely sure. I know we've apprehended or worked with the Border Patrol and apprehended about 40,000 individuals, but I don't have estimates on the amount of trash.
Are you able to at least compare to previous years to this year? Is that on the rise? Is it the same? Where are we on that? I mean, the crossing numbers speak for themselves. It's tenfold of what it used to be on a daily basis on the worst day before of what it is now. So can you give me the guesstimate on that?
I would say that in my experience in the past 25 years, we have seen ebbs and flows of border crossings across multiple administrations depending on what's happening. And I don't have the data right now to say whether or not this year is higher than previous years.
Well, the data is there from Border Patrol. The data is there from our border agencies of the numbers. I mean, in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've seen about over 6 million crossings and encounters. So the data is there. And I'm wondering how this is, I want to get to the bottom of how this is impacting our natural resources, how this is impacting our natural forest land on the federal side. And I understand you may not have specific data. I know Mr. Reynolds is going to follow up with me on some of these questions on your side as well, which I'm looking forward to receiving. But I'm hoping that at least anecdotally you can give me some evidence of what you've been able to see.
I mean, we've asked. And we didn't have any specific data on the amount of trash that has occurred that's different this year than previous years. Again, there were about 40,000 individuals apprehended on National Forest System lands this year. That's the best data that I can give to you. What I can tell you is that this has been a continuous problem for decades of us removing trash and other natural resource and visitor effects that occur on our international border along the Coronado.
I want to squeeze in one more question. I don't want to go over time because I want to be invited back by Mr. Gosar and the committee. So on the National Forest System, it's home for many threatened and endangered species. Can you describe the impacts of what's happening right now at the border on them and their critical habitat? As the last question.
The Coronado has the highest number of endangered species of any national forest across the country. There are some species that travel in between Mexico and the United States that are impacted at times, as well as water sources that are dependent for certain endangered species that are impacted in these crossings as well.
Thank you, sir. And bear down.
Okay. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. French, how many illegal marijuana growing operations have you identified over the last year on Forest Service properties?
In the 5 years previous to this
No,
year.
just last year.
I don't have the numbers for this year. I can give you the numbers because we don't have them all put together yet. But in the last 5 years, it's been about 330.
And you can get us those new for the last year?
Yep,
please?
when we get them.
Okay. Now, recently we came across reports of the cartels participating in human trafficking and all types of horrific behavior where they employ these illegal grow sites. What has the Forest Service found evidence of, and what are you currently doing to both monitor and prevent this from happening in the future?
So there is information that's come into us that cartels are involved in some of the illegal grow sites that are occurring on national forests. The extent and scope of that I can't speculate on. What I can tell you is in the previous 5 years, we have remediated 336 grow sites. About 350 miles of irrigation pipes have been removed. About 300,000 pounds of trash have been removed from those sites. And we found a lot of toxic, frankly, banned substances that we have to be removed from those sites as well.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. So, I mean, most of these sites have cartel bearings to them. So, I mean, so when you find one of these, how do you go about the interdiction? How do you employ law enforcement? And what other assets do you have for that law enforcement activity?
So, I mean, okay, yeah, we work very closely with other federal agencies, state and local agencies, and both the monitoring of sites that pop up or occur on National Forest System lands, and then for essentially addressing those.
So do you go through a local prosecutor? Do you go through, I mean, so you're looking at warrants, I'm sure. And how do you work with that, with local, and the gentleman from California kind of hit on it. How do you work those assets together? Because you don't want to be put in harm's way either.
No, we have MOUs and agreements in place all the way from local law enforcement up through other federal agencies, and they work as task forces.
Let me ask you something. So on these assets that we're utilizing up there in New York, I actually went there with the chairman, Mr. Westerman. Tell me how you tend to mitigate 2,200 single men in a compound on a runway, and you've got playing fields for kids all the way around it. How are you going to keep them on there? I mean, these are 2,200. The only person I can actually think of might be Joe Arpaio could do it, but tell me more about this, because it doesn't seem right, and it also doesn't seem like it fulfills the NEPA process, even in an extensive service, if you catch my meaning.
Yeah, I appreciate that concern, Mr. Chairman, and it was a topic of conversation which I will lump, if you will allow me, into safety, right? The safety and management. So we've left the management of the migrant camps to the city, to the folks that are leasing the property. The U.S. Park Police, who I know came and spoke here, at least the union, they are on site to protect the park resources and the normal operations. We asked in the lease for 24-hour protection from NYPD for the camp itself and all of its operations, as well as, to your point, anything that comes from that camp that would impact people or park resources. So we have a full protection strategy in the lease, is the short story.
So have you ever seen a success rate on any process like this at all? I mean, it's very extensive, and it's going to be almost impossible to keep those people on that limited site.
Yeah, it's there is a fence, there are security procedures, but I appreciate your concern, and I think we just need to keep very focused on this with those partners.
Let me also ask you, tell me that the chairman asked us, and I want to reiterate it because it's that important. We're doing this as a benefit to the governor and the mayor. Why wouldn't that stop us from doing this as a precedent? Why wouldn't we? Tell me why this is not going to stop right here. Doesn't it set a precedent? Because it does.
I think the way I would look at it is there was a unique ask from the state of New York in this one location. It's a very as all of the national parks are. Very unique place. It had a resource area that a lease made sense on. I'm not sure that would make sense at a lot of other parks. I am not aware of any other asks or any other interest anywhere else that we would do this.
Okay, well, my time is up. I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reynolds, at the end of FY22, the National Parks Service reported a $22.3 billion deferred maintenance backlog. How much additional money is going to be needed to cover the wear and tear of the housing of these migrants on federal land?
In this case, the 100% of all costs are borne by the lease in order to mitigate the site as well as the park improvements that I had had a chance to mention earlier. So there will be no additional cost to the service's operating budget from this.
Okay. So in NPS's lease with New York City, the only agreement this administration will be making to the housing migrants on federal lands, or will we be seeing tent cities? I mean, even what about along the GW Parkway here in D.C.?
No, I think the GW Parkway is pretty crowded already, right, sir? But no, there's no other interest, no other planning efforts underway, and this again is a unique area with certain criteria that the lease met. Okay.
One other thing I wanted to ask you real quick. Man, they got us strung out. Even though we're voting, we're like crazy. We're also in hearings like crazy. For the issuance of the lease for the Bennett Field, the Floyd Bennett Field, the National Park Service refused to conduct a public process to listen to the residents of nearby communities in New York. Will you commit to providing any sort of public forum, or at least to listen to the concerned residents of Brooklands and Queens?
Yeah, we have an excellent superintendent and team there at Gateway. They are working hard to interface with all of the various and the very numerous numbers of partners and concerns up there.
Good. I look forward to coordinating and with you and your staff and on this public forum too. So,
thank you,
Mr. Chairman. That's different chairman there. Mr. Chairman, that's all I had. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I do want to again thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and for the time that you spent here today. The witnesses, Mr. French and Mr. Reynolds, are dismissed, and as soon as they're seated, I'll introduce our second panel of witnesses.